It's all about the he said, she said bullshit. Jean breaks stuff, and she carries a Phoenix Force. What a motherfucking Phoenix Force. It's amazing that in 2019, with fear, bigotry, and violence on the rise, that it isn't easy to make a good X-Men movie. After all, the very concept of the X-Men is a metaphor for resilience and direct action in the face of oppression. But franchise is gonna franchise, baby. So in order to fulfill a contractual obligation and Fox's remaining power trip over control of the X-Men franchise, we got Dark Phoenix. Now, it'd be a lot easier if this was a wholly bad movie, but it's not, actually, and that's kind of weird. It's deeply flawed, and it has a pretty awful third act. But you get some very legit Nightcrawler action where he's like, poof, 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 poof. You get some cool Magneto moments, too, with the and the even being 80% a decent X-Men movie, 20% can make or break that movie. And unfortunately, as Jean says, she breaks stuff. Spoilers ahead for those who care. I'm Dan Umphin, and this is the Doomcast. Okay. Dark Phoenix opens with some of the dumbest dialogue that I have seen in a movie in a while. No less than 5 times do characters reiterate and establish that they are going to space in a spacecraft, and that they are surprised that they can go to space, and the president himself, for some reason, who has an X-phone, asks them to go to space to get a space shuttle that's stranded. That is not the X-Men. The president doesn't have an X-phone. He doesn't call the X-Men. The president calls Steve Rogers. The president calls Tony Stark. The president does not call the radical lefty paramilitary group made up of weird minorities that can turn themselves inside out, that the government is actively oppressing. That is not the X-Men. Anyhow, they go to space, and then somehow Storm seals the cracks in the space shuttle with ice. This is not really how her powers work, but it's fine, they're still technically in the upper atmosphere. Anyway, Jean goes back into the shuttle to try and save the last guy with Nightcrawler, who Nightcrawler low-key is like one of the cooler characters in the film. And then she absorbs all this fire goop. They don't really explain it. Here's the thing that really frosts my space shuttle, is there's a good movie in here, and there's things that they must have changed on the back end, and it just... Like, if you saw this movie on FX at 2:30 in the afternoon 3 years from now, you'd be like, actually, that was a lot better than what I'd heard, and you'd be right. And then you'd be like, well, they never really got into what the Phoenix Force is, because they never really did, honestly. If you're a comic fan, you know, yeah, well, it would have helped to have information about what the hell the Phoenix Force was a whole lot. Anyway, Jessica Chastain, whose mutant power is somehow having no eyebrows, plays a character that's some sort of poorly explained alien. Again, not a lot of detail. I assume just because I know comics that the Phoenix Force destroyed their planet, but they never really got into that either. Like, the aliens, they could have just left the aliens out of the whole movie. Anyway, the X-Men are stoked that they saved these astronauts, so Charles Xavier decides to let them throw a kegger in the woods while he goes and starts drinking too, which, by the way, he's drinking the entire movie. I'm not kidding, and I don't even think that's acting. I just think that's James McAvoy, because he's just like picking up bottles of a plastic like Wolfenkrantz blended whatever Scotch garbage, and he's just drinking it the whole time. And Charles Xavier would at least have like a Scotch that's going to be in glass. Anyway, the X-Men are out having a kegger in the woods, which is a brilliant idea for teenagers who can light shit on fire with their eyeballs. Dazzler is out dancing to some music that is clearly not from 1992, but I guess they couldn't get the rights to CNC Music Factory or whatever shit that would have put it clearly and firmly in its time and place, but that's fine. Also, Scott Summers makes Storm create ice cubes, which once again is not how her powers work. She is a weather witch, not a cocktail waitress. Ice cubes are not weather anyway. Jean decides to get blackout drunk, which is absolutely something that you should do after your girlfriend absorbs a destructive cosmic force. Scott. Anyway, she loses it and decides to go find her dad, who she thought she had killed. This is the one solidly engaging arc of the entire movie. It's Charles and his relationship with the remaining first-class students, Hank and Raven, and how the white lies to them and Jean eroded his relationship with all of them. after finding a surprisingly mobile version of her father, considering his neck was like my bank account 2 days before payday, which is broke as fuck, son, she flees to find Magneto in what looks like the bombest hippie commune ever. Like you just throw some speakers up and grab some coolers and you're at a chill jam band festival. But this is 1992, so isn't Magneto like 70? So Magneto and Jean have a heart-to-heart in his crib with a natural edge wood bench and the decorative bowl of heirloom baby potatoes. Eric gets pissed off and sends Jean away. But once he finds out the extent of Jean's new powers and what she did with them, he takes a dude with living dreadlocks, who is low-key pretty awesome, and one of the Dora Milaje, I guess, to New York to go and try and kill Jean, and all that does is get her super pissed off and gets everybody caught and put on a train, and then alien Jessica Chastain is there to the absolute indifference of the story. It's not a great movie in the context of First Class and Days of Future Past. It's a clear, better movie than it's getting credit for. But it's far from great. It makes me wonder if we've approached this weird group thing about movies and reviews. There's a good movie in here somewhere, right? This movie wasn't amazing by any stretch, but it felt better than Apocalypse, certainly better than Last Stand, in my opinion. But it doesn't matter now. Whatever does end up happening, I hope that when the X-Men does get revived, they make it about what made it great in the Chris Claremont days. Bright colors, weird powers, people hated and feared by a world that they're sworn to protect, and making good on a promise to save it. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. This has been the Doomcast.